Okay, so let's talk about poetry. First off, let's talk about the basic parameters of this unit. The poetry unit, the section in the textbook, begins on page 488, and there are somewhat less than 100 pages there. I am not going to assign you pieces of this section. You need to read the whole section. It's slightly less than 100 pages. The sooner you read it, the better and easier the work will go for you. You're perfectly capable of managing this yourself. Work it into your schedule. Make it happen. You don't need me to manage this for you. So that's it, 488, and it ends on page 580. So slightly less than 100 pages. Read it, sooner the better. Okay, this unit will follow the exact same shape as the short fiction unit. You'll be asked for a little tiny reflective piece this week, and then next week you'll be asked for a little bit larger, more formal essay. And then at the end of the unit, there will be 2 weeks in which we'll draft and produce a larger and even more formal essay. So it'll follow exactly the same principles. It would make sense to use the same material for all three, which you can certainly do, or you may want to go a little more broad and do some more exploration. After we finish the poetry unit, we'll have a little time left to finish up the novel piece, the capstone project. If you haven't started on the capstone project yet, you need to start it yesterday. Okay, you cannot do this. It's a big project, which is why we've been working on it for 10 weeks now. You cannot leave this till the last minute and expect to complete it successfully. That would simply be fooling yourself, and you guys are smarter and better than that. So 2 more things to do, the poetry unit and the capstone project. While I'm talking about the capstone project, I have set up those novel discussion groups for you, and I think you ought to use those to discuss with each other. If there are other students working on the same novel you're working on, by all means, use those to discuss and help each other and provide resources. But also, those will allow me to provide individual resources to help you, even if you're the only person working on that novel, and even if it's only you and me in that discussion group, I can still help and guide you, and that is my hope, to be able to do that. But you have to join the group, number 1, and number 2, as I said a couple of weeks ago, because of the way Canvas is set up, I don't know if you put something up in that particular discussion. I won't know that it's there unless you tell me it's there. And there are 14 or 15 discussion groups. I'm not going to go and open every one of them every day to see if there's anything there. Just not going to do that. So if you post something in your novel discussion group, and even if it's only you in there, let me know, and I will come in there and see if I can help and advise you. But you have to let me know, because for whatever reason, the Canvas gurus haven't set those up in a way that I get automatically notified. Okay, so let's talk about poetry. People come to a study of poetry with several sad misconceptions, and I think the first one probably is that poetry, the only way you can understand poetry is to figure out the intent of the poet, the original writer. What did that person intend? And the only way to understand it is to figure out what that person intended. So leave that outside the door. As you've learned with short fiction, our primary goal is not to get at what the writer intends, because a lot of times you simply can't, and that's a hopeless quest. Our job is to understand the piece and then take our own position on it using inductive reasoning from the piece itself, evidence from the piece itself, to support our interpretation. So the first thing is, you don't have to figure out what the writer intended. If you want to try to do that, and if you can't, it might help or it might hinder. So leave that misconception aside. The second misconception that keeps people from understanding poetry is the fact that poetry does, at some level, at some far out place, poetry does cross over into aesthetics, the study and science of beauty, and in different ways from the way short fiction does it. Poetry creates beauty, whatever you define that as, but that's beyond the pale of this class. It's not necessary, and it's probably distracting to simply talk about how beautiful it is. Now, a beautiful effect may be created by the elements the poet uses, and that's a perfectly legitimate thing to talk about, to provide the evidence and to say it's beautiful because the words are combined in this way, or something like that. But again, to talk about how beautiful everything is really doesn't get us to the purpose of this class. Remember, this is not a literature class that employs critical thinking. This is a critical thinking class that employs literature as its primary tool. So, for our purposes, what we want to talk about is not so much trying to figure out what a poem means, but trying to figure out how it creates that effect. How the words are combined, how the rhythms go along, and things like that. We'll be talking about that in future weeks, but that's perfectly within the realm of possibility for anyone who reads poetry seriously. Now, yes, as I said a moment ago, we're going to want to go beyond that. I'm going to want to go beyond that. I love poetry, and poetry frequently makes me weep, believe it or not. But that's not what we're here to understand. We look at the poem, we look at the elements that combine to create the poem, and then we take a position interpretatively about the poem, and then we support that position using evidence from the poem. So it's exactly the same thing as a short story. Our approach in this class is going to be exactly the same approach. So anybody can do that, anybody can make sense out of it, but I want to refer us back to last week's discussion about plot details versus critical comments. And this is the third misconception, and that is that all you have to do to write a paper analyzing poetry is simply to translate into prose what the poem says and retell the story, and you've done it. No, you haven't done it. You've simply provided plot details. You haven't made critical commentary. That's a crucial difference. Now, when you read the beginning of the poetry unit, you will see that the advice, and it's very well taken advice, first thing to do in analyzing a poem is to paraphrase it, translate it into your own words, because that helps you grasp the way the thing works. It's just like translating English into, say, French or German or Spanish. The very act of translation into that other language helps me understand the structure of that language, even if I don't get it right a good bit of the time. So yes, you need to paraphrase, but a paper cannot be paraphrased. Paraphrase is simply a tool to help you. So by all means paraphrase the thing, by all means get it in your own words, but then move on and make critical commentary about the way the thing works. Every one of you is completely capable of doing this, and I know because I've seen you do it. So don't settle for the cheap fix. Get on and do the work and understand the stuff, and then you'll have achieved the goal of this unit and this class, in fact. There are, and this is my last point, sometimes a poem tells a story. Sometimes it doesn't tell a story. Sometimes it's a group of words that create a certain effect. And sometimes it works in other ways. Sometimes it takes one little tiny idea and expands it and makes it into a metaphor. There are different categories of poetry. Basically, there are three, and I'm not going to burden you with them this week, but next week we'll talk about how to begin categorizing a poem, not to the end of simply categorizing it, but to the end of placing it next to other similar poems and comparing it so that we can understand it. And finally, remember, our job is to understand the poem, not necessarily to understand the poet. That may happen, and when it happens, it's magical, but our job is to look at the thing itself, the piece of craftsmanship, look at how it works, talk about how it works, and make a case for why it works the way it does with evidence based on the original text. Okay? We will have some fun, I hope, with this unit as well. Poetry can be moving and beautiful and life-changing. I will tell you that I think a poem by T.S. Eliot probably saved my sanity, if not my life, at one point. So I don't want to downplay the power of poetry. But as in every other kind of academic approach, whether it's poetry or music or chemistry or biology or political science, in the academic world, enlightenment, truth, real vision lies on the other side of the discipline that gets you there. It's not on this side of discipline. It's not without discipline and without a focused approach. It's on the other side. It's beyond discipline, focused approach. You can't get there in the academic world any other way. Okay, so that's it. We'll be talking this week. The assignment sheet will go out very shortly. And as I said, once we finish this unit, we should have a little bit of time to wait to work on your capstone projects. But the capstone project assignment sheet is already up there, and I would advise you to take a look at it if you haven't already, because that'll sink your boat. Not doing that one will sink your boat. So don't let that happen. You're smarter than that. You're better than that. And you're better organized than that. Okay, bye.